This is Bob Ferguson, and I am the co-director of the Sustainable Living Coalition. And I have with me today my very good friend, Dr. John Ikerd, who is professor emeritus from the University of Missouri, a renowned agricultural economist, and really a marvelous friend of Fairfield and way beyond. I asked John to come on today because we're embarked on a project in far southeast Iowa, the 9 counties comprising the southeasternmost point of Iowa, in doing something that we're now calling the Southeast Iowa Regional Food Web. We're looking at doing this because it's just prudent. Precautionary principle says if you know there's risks, and there are risks to California agriculture and agriculture everywhere else, we have great land, we have water. Why shouldn't we be growing more of our food, distributing more of our food, manufacturing more of our food, and keeping all those dollars in our local communities? So this video is particularly for people in this area who are going to be hearing about this. And I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction to John, just to demonstrate that this isn't some kind of pie in the sky thing. This is a real possibility. But I'm first going to ask John to talk a little bit about his background, how he went from being a fairly conventional agricultural economist to the very effective radical that he is now.
Well, thank you, Bob. I'll try to make this brief, but I grew up on a small farm down in southwest Missouri, and I had an opportunity to go to the University of Missouri and get a degree in agricultural economics. When I went to the university, I didn't even know what agricultural economics was, but that's what I ended up getting my degree in. I worked for private industry for a while, and then I came back to the university and eventually got my PhD in agricultural economics. And then I had a 30-year academic career in 4 different land-grant universities, North Carolina State, Oklahoma State, University of Georgia, come back to the University of Missouri. The first half of that career, I was a very traditional agricultural economist, talking about farming had to be a bottom line business, and you know, that you had to focus on the economic profitability of farming, and that you had to be you know, that if the family business got in the way of the farm business had to take priority over that, get big or get out, because we were talking about when you focus on economic efficiency, then we adopted this sort of industrial model, specialized, standardized, consolidate, and larger farming operations. It was well intended, because what we were going to do is use sort of the industrial model to improve the efficiency of agriculture, which would bring down the cost of production. And we talked about bringing down the cost of food to consumers, and we create profit opportunities for farmers that made the transition. And so we'd have viable, prosperous rural communities, and it was a win-win-win for everybody. And then I believed that for some period of time, and that's what I went out and taught farmers. I always had an extension appointment. And then the farm financial crisis of the 1980s come along. And at that time, I was head of the Extension Agricultural Economics Department at the University of Georgia. And that was the time whenever we had prosperous years in agriculture in the 70s, and farmers followed our advice and got bigger, and rather than getting out and expanded production, but in many cases, they'd borrowed large amounts of money to expand during that time. And that was the time of high inflation, high interest rates. And then we got into the 1980s, we got into a domestic recession, a global recession, the export markets dried up. Commodity prices fell like a rock. Farmers couldn't pay off the debts. They were losing their farms, committing suicide. I looked at it and I said, look, this isn't working. And then I came to the realization that the farmers who had been following our advice, that had gotten big, borrowed money, we told them that they could leverage it because of the prosperous future out here in the export market, were in the biggest trouble. And then I was going to say it wasn't working for farmers, but neither was it working for the rural communities that depended on those farmers. Not just economically, but also socially, you know, to have families in those communities to send to school and have health care and various other things that it takes to make quality of life in a rural community. So when the family farms were failing, the rural communities were failing, and then I looked around and see what we were doing to the land. Soil erosion was just rampant because we were plowing fence row to fence row and taking out the fence rows and the windbreaks and everything else, getting up the terraces. And so then I could see that this was not sustainable. And so at that time, I said, I can't continue doing what I've been doing And fortunately, the sustainable agriculture movement was kind of coming onto the scene. And I was able to get some grant money from USDA out of the first low input sustainable agriculture program that allowed me to go back to the University of Missouri. And I've basically been pursuing that ever since. All the things I did in the last 10 years, 11 years of my academic career at the University of Missouri focused on sustainable agriculture and sustainable community development. I headed up a project there the last 5 years that was funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation on linking sustainable agriculture with sustainable community development. And then I've continued to work on these issues since I retired because I really believe that it's important that we transform agriculture if we're going to revitalize rural communities and that we're going to kind of restore the ecological and social integrity of the food system of the country.
Beautiful. Well, as many people have, many theorists have said, it's tough to take on an incumbent system on the ground that they care about. So we're probably not going to take on the industrial agricultural system, nor even the system of grocery stores and distribution and all that. We're thinking about something rather different in this Southeast Iowa regional food web. So let's have you talk to us, John, a little bit about how practical is it to do such a thing? Can it even be done?
Right.
If it can be done, how is it done? Let's talk about the food web. What does that actually mean?
Well, you know, if I had the answers to all these questions, I probably wouldn't be here today. I'd be highly successful and highly sought out and everything. So,
well, you are successful.
It's just my perspective. I believe that we really need to fundamentally redesign the food system, but regardless of whether you feel that larger objective or not, then if we just focus on creating economic and social opportunities for a desirable quality of life, let's say in rural areas, the system that we have today, basically we bring in outside investment from somewhere else, whether it's industrial agriculture or other economic development. And much of what happens in the rural community from an economic standpoint, the real benefit of that goes to somebody outside that community. And that's the reason we see a lot of rural communities in depressed situations. So if you talk about, okay, we're going to create something that's going to be good for the people here, well, if you look around at rural areas, the most valuable, economically valuable or potentially economic valuable resource that we have out here that's geographically fixed in one place, that can't be moved somewhere else, is agricultural land. That's still kind of the economic foundation of rural areas. Now you can leverage that and build a lot onto the initial productivity and processing, transportation, distribution, and then you can create a desirable quality of life. Then you can attract people to rural areas that are good places to farm and good places to live, that can work from anywhere and they choose to work there. So as I see it, we're trying to recreate sort of desirable quality of life in rural areas for people that live in the small communities like Fairfield, Mount Pleasant, Washington, places like that. Create a desirable quality of life here, regardless of what you think about transforming the system as a whole. Then we need to start and build it on a foundation of agriculture and the food production and food distribution and food availability. If you look into sort of the intentional community movement or back to the land movement, or anybody that's really focused on creating what I call sustainable rural communities, it's always rooted in the food system. That's where they start from. Now, once you've got a solid food system, then you can take the same kind of principles and ideas and expand into housing and transportation, distribution, recreate the whole society. So I think it's important to start at the food level. And I think it's important to start at the farm level, where you talk about healthy soils. It's really the foundation for a healthy food system is healthy soils. Healthy farms come from healthy soils. Healthy foods come from healthy soils. And the system that we have now, you know, as you were talking about earlier, the foods produced all in different geographic concentration around and shipped in and shipped around, and there's really no commitment to maintaining the health in a particular place because the money's going somewhere else, the food's going somewhere else. So it's like a community saying, we're going to take care of this resource in a way that meets the needs of the people here, economically, socially, ethically, doing the things that we want to do here. And so I think what we talk about with a food web, then you talk about kind of breaking away to a certain extent, developing the concept of food sovereignty. You're breaking away from this global national food system to the extent that it fits something that you can do in your community. You look and see, what can we produce here? What do the farmers want to produce here? What do the consumers want in this area? That all fits together. And then the food web kind of ties that together. And what you can produce in one community may be different than the other. But if you can find like-minded communities, then you can link one community with another community, with another community, with another, that are all committed to the same sort of principles of sustainability, a desirable quality of life from a social, economic, and ecological or natural resource basis. And then you're put together sort of a web of food production that meets the ecological, economic, and social needs of the people.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that we're not trying to boil the ocean here. We're not trying to take on or even shift the incumbent system. We're seeing, as I see it, what are our resources? We got fabulous land, we got water, and we've got people, and we got creativity, and we got knowledge from generations past that's not all lost. So we put those elements together to create, as you pointed out, this web of food availability, which would come from food production and food manufacturer and distribution, but all on a relatively hyper-local scale.
Yeah.
This region of 9 counties running from Wapello and Washington over to Des Moines, down to Lee, up Rablawaisa, and across to Davis and Van Buren, and throw Henry and Jefferson in there, and you got us. That's about 100,000 people here, right. And that's enough people to create something that's, I think, possible. Not possible necessarily just in Jefferson County or just in Henry County or just in Des Moines County, but if you pull us together, we have a shot at creating, enough diversity and enough power. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think the key is right now, the bottleneck right now to local food systems is in the processing and distribution area. Because in those areas, there are significant economies of scale, which means that there's a lot of savings in terms of the final cost of food to consumers that's associated with the efficiency of that processing. In other words, if you're going to go to a farmer's market and have everything, all meat and other things processed at a local market, you're going to pay a pretty stiff premium prices for what you get. Anything that's processed, because the processing is the least efficient at the small scale. So if you go to a large enough scale, like you say, with 100,000 people, then you can put in place a processing facility that's a significant size. You can have the production distributed around on farms all through the area, and then you can consolidate it for processing at particular points that are reasonably efficient processing plants, maybe not as efficient as the very largest or most efficient of the big industrial plants, but still at a level that makes the local food affordable to people, all the people within the community. And so I think that's kind of a key thing that you're overcoming with kind of a regional food system. The other thing I want to point out, is I think the way change always happens is you don't change the system all at once. What you do is you create successful models of something that people look at and say, well, that's fundamentally better than what we have now. And I think that's the way we ultimately move away from sort of the industrial global food system to more localized food systems, is when we build local food systems and people look at that and they say that that's better. And so you wouldn't have to have all of the farmers in that area that would buy into this model. You wouldn't have to have all the consumers in this area that bought into that. But a key point, I think, is you have to be able to connect the production level, what's happening on the farm level. You have to create an alternative system that goes all the way to the consumer. Now, what you do in that, you gain the economic efficiencies of coordinating that whole system that a vertically integrated corporation would achieve with a large corporate organization. But you're achieving that by coordinating it internally through this local food web, because you're operating by a set of common principles and common practices, and you create relationships of trust and dependency among people that know each other and care about each other. And so that whole system works efficiently then in terms of farmers producing things that they can produce that the consumers actually want, and that make a reasonable return on investment or profit for the farmers, but are still affordable to consumers. So when you control that whole system, now you can do that at the local level. You can get all of these people working together at the local level. And if you expand out to too large an operation, then you got to go to something that looks pretty much just like the large vertically integrated corporation. So if you can maintain it at the local level, then you can make sure that your local producers are getting an economic return that allows them to have a decent economic living, that they're taking care of the land, that they're able to be good neighbors and responsible members of the community, and you can assure that the processors and distributors are getting an equitable return on their investment, so that the whole system is sustainable, and that the consumers' needs are being met at prices that are affordable. Maybe not the cheapest, but they're affordable. And then you can find ways to make that system accessible to everybody in the community, regardless of their income levels, because you're doing it on the basis of kind of a personal connection, a personal responsibility. I've promoted the idea of using community food utilities as kind of a formal structure, but you could do it with a cooperative, you could do it with a nonprofit organization, you could do it with a benefit corporation or whatever. But you need something that says that we're not going to just allow whoever has the most power within this vertical system to extract all the profits and exploit everybody else, but we're going to put together a vertical system all the way from the farm level to the consumer that ensures that the basic needs of all are met, so that we can sustain the system over the long run, and that it contributes to desirable quality of life for everybody that's involved. We've kind of been distracted with the idea that economic efficiency, that profitability, that income and wealth is the key to a more desirable quality of life. And I think there's plenty of evidence that indicates now that that's not the key. Up to a certain level, up until your basic needs are met, then it's very important that you have enough income to meet your basic needs. But beyond that very modest level, in developing countries like $10,000 or $15,000 per person, beyond that level, quality of life is about the quality of your relationships and having some sense of purpose and meaning, sort of the ethical quality of life. And so what we're talking about here with a local food system is a local food system that focuses on meeting the basic economic needs of people, farmers and consumers as well, in terms of affordability, but also focuses on meeting the social needs, meeting the relationships, giving people the sense of belonging, that they are connected within the community, that they have people that they care about and they care about them. And it's all in the economic system. And then the other part is you're creating an ethical way of life, in terms of you're taking care of the land, you're ensuring that people's needs are met, you ensure that there's healthy food, that feeds healthy people, you regenerate the whole system, renew, sustain it over the long run. So you're putting together a system that sustains a desirable quality of life by rooting it in the soil, rooting it in the food, and then building out from there.
John, thank you. This is really thrilling. It's a lot of fun, and we're going to do this thing.
I wish you all the very best. We need some examples. I've just said over and over again, if we can create a few examples of communities that are getting together and have figured out how to make this work, I'm glad to share my ideas, but I don't know how it works. It's going to take communities that are willing to come together and prove that this can work, that you can actually create a more desirable quality of life that's rooted in the soil, that's rooted in food, and a more sustainable, robust economy as well. If you can do that, then there's going to be other communities that want to do it and other communities that do it. And then you begin to build that web, you build that network of like-minded communities that have a different vision of what the world's about. It's about a quality of life and not just wealth and income. That's a part of it. The economics is a means to these other greater and more important ends. And if we begin to develop communities like that, then it catches on. Then pretty soon you have changed the country and you've changed the world. But you do it one community at a time.
Well, here's to building a web of webs.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bob.